Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Raiders of the Sands by Francis Summers Cox, Chapter 7, River Games. The next weeks were strange ones for Abraham. The palace compound was very quiet without the other boys. His stepmothers had never been especially friendly, but now they ignored him completely. The younger slaves took over the herding of the cattle. He still went and did it most days to keep away from the gloomy compound and Granny Esther, who would see him off with her usual cry. "Mind how you go, Abraham, and mind for kidnappers." Abraham didn't actually know anyone personally who had been snatched by slave raiders when they were out herding the animals or getting water or firewood, but there were lots of stories about it happening. "I think I'd rather be kidnapped than stay around this hellhole," he muttered to himself. Even herding the cattle wasn't the same without his brothers. He'd grown up with the slaves. He was good friends with most of them, but that didn't stop him missing his brothers. It would have been all right if Lahia had been allowed out with him, but she mostly had her jobs at home. Every morning when he set out, she would look up from her grain pounding or sweeping and wave him goodbye, and he would wonder why, again, why girls weren't allowed to herd cattle. One glorious day she did slip out, and they went over to the King's Hill and looked at where it had all happened. They crouched at the top of the steep riverbank and peered down to where the river, swollen by the big rains, rushed noisily below. The old she-elephant had long been taken away, for her tusks and her skin. "I know," said Lahia excitedly. "Let's climb right down. How are you at swimming?" "Not very good. I've tried a few times when I've been out with the cows. It depends on how deep the river is. I don't suppose you've ever tried, have you?" "Not really. I don't know why. Girls never seem to have the chance to swim, but I'd love to try." And so, clinging with all their fingers and toes onto bushes and tufts of grass and any bits of stone that poked out, they scrambled down the sheer red cliffside to where the water roared between the rocks, a deep red-brown because of all the soil it had washed away with it. They poked sticks in to test the depth and at last risked it. In places it didn't even come up to their knees, but they found a few pools where they could lie and splash and feel the water rushing past, trying to tug them downstream, or sit under a little waterfall and feel the flood gushing down over their heads. That was one of the good days, and they went back to play in the river whenever they could. But most of the time Abraham felt curiously empty and lost. Worse still, his mother was right. He did feel guilty, as if it was his fault that his brothers had been sent away. Nimrod was a big consolation. He was certainly a lot of work. Abraham and Lahia kept him on with milk and egg diet and looked forward to the next fasting period when there would be all the milk and eggs Nimrod wanted, since nobody else was allowed to eat any of them. Unfortunately, they had just missed the 2-week fast before the Feast of Our Lady. He stayed chained up overnight, and in the daytime the two children would take him for walks on his chain. If there were no animals at all around in the yard, they let him loose there, to the delight of the little girls and the dismay of their mothers. And that's the end of chapter 7.